Something isn't right. Yesterday, on December 12th, 2025, CNN dropped a bombshell analysis piece. They titled it Power Limitations, a Trump Analysis. On the surface, it looks like just another political think piece, right? Just another breakdown of checks and balances, court rulings, and congressional gridlock. They want you to believe it's a standard report on the state of the presidency as we close out the first year of this new administration. But I read it. I read it 3 times, and then I read it again. And let me tell you, what they aren't saying is screaming louder than what they are. Why now? Why exactly 1 year into the term are they pushing a narrative that the president's power is limited? Why is the mainstream media suddenly obsessed with convincing you that the executive branch is handcuffed? Is it because it's true? Or is it because they need you to believe it's true while something else, something much bigger, moves in the shadows? If you think this is just about laws and statutes, you aren't paying attention. This article isn't a report, it's a signal. And in the next 10 minutes, we are going to deconstruct every single word, every omitted fact, and every suspicious angle of this report to find out what is really going on in Washington. They think you're asleep. They think you'll read the headline and move on. But we know better. Welcome back to the channel. Let's go down the rabbit hole. Let's start with the official narrative they are feeding us. The article's core premise is simple. It claims that despite the aggressive rhetoric we heard on the campaign trail in 2024, the actual implementation of policy in 2025 has been stifled. They cite judicial firewalls, they cite bureaucratic inertia, and they cite a fragile coalition in Congress. According to CNN, the Trump administration has hit a wall. They paint a picture of a presidency that is boxed in. They mention the failed rollout of the executive order on domestic energy production from last month. They highlight the Supreme Court's hesitation on the new deportation protocols. They want you to look at these examples and think, oh, look, the system works. The power is limited. Everything is fine. But pause for a second. Ask yourself, since when does the legacy media go out of its way to comfort the public about Trump's lack of power? Think about the last decade. The narrative has always been about the danger of unchecked power. It's been about dictatorship, about the shredding of norms, about the absolute authority of the executive. For 8 years, that was the drumbeat. He is too powerful. He is unstoppable. And now, suddenly, on December 12th, 2025, the script flips. Now the headline is Power Limitations? Suspicious doesn't even begin to cover it. When the media narrative shifts 180 degrees overnight, it's not because the facts changed, it's because the objective changed. Look closely at the section on bureaucratic resistance, paragraph 4 of the article. It describes career officials in the DOJ and the EPA as successfully slowing down directive implementation through procedural adherence. They frame this as a victory for the rule of law. But read between the lines. What they are actually admitting, perhaps accidentally, is the existence of the very deep state they spent years telling us was a conspiracy theory. They are admitting that unelected officials are actively vetoing the orders of an elected president. But here's the catch. They aren't reporting this to expose the bureaucracy. They're reporting it to normalize it. By calling it a limitation of power, they're rebranding insubordination as a constitutional check. They're training you to accept that the person you voted for is not actually in charge. And why would they do that? Why tell the public that the president is weak? Because a weak president is a distracted public. If you believe nothing is happening, you stop watching, you stop scrutinizing, you think the battle is over because the court stopped him, and that is exactly when the real moves are made. I looked into the court cases they cited. The article mentions State of California versus Trump as a key example of these limitations. But if you dig into the court docket, that case isn't a hard stop. It's a temporary stay, a procedural delay. It's not a limitation, it's a pause button. But CNN frames it as a brick wall. Why? To lower your guard, to make you think the momentum has died. This isn't analysis, this is anesthesia. They're trying to put the electorate to sleep. Now, let's talk about timing. In the world of intelligence and political strategy, coincidences do not exist. This article was published on December 12th. Why is that date important? We're weeks away from the start of the new legislative session in January 2026. We're approaching the midterm campaign cycle kickoffs. But more importantly, look at what else happened this week. While everyone was distracted by this article about limitations, did you hear about the quiet restructuring at the Pentagon? Did you see the Treasury Department's memo on digital currency regulation that was leaked on dark web forums just 2 days ago? Probably not, because the algorithm was feeding you this CNN piece about how the president is stuck. This is a classic magician's trick. Watch the left hand, the limitations, while the right hand rearranges the deck. The article spends 3 paragraphs discussing the failure to pass the omnibus security bill. They call it a sign of the president's waning influence over the House. But is it? Or is it a calculated stall? Think about it. If you want to push through something controversial, something massive, you don't do it when everyone is screaming about your power. You do it when the media is writing obituaries for your agenda. By convincing the opposition that the president is weak, they demobilize them. Why protest a president who can't get anything done? Why rally against a specific policy if CNN says the courts have already blocked it? It creates a vacuum, and in that vacuum, things happen. I want to draw your attention to a quote in the middle of the article from an anonymous senior administration official. We love those, don't we? This official says, "We are recalibrating our approach to fit the current legal landscape." Recalibrating, that's a very specific word. You don't recalibrate when you've given up. You recalibrate when you're changing targets. You recalibrate when you're preparing to fire at something else. This article claims the administration is backing down. I submit to you that they are actually hunkering down. They're going dark. The limitations are a smokescreen for a shift in strategy, one that doesn't rely on public executive orders or legislative battles that can be tracked on C-SPAN. If they can't move through Congress and they can't move through the courts, where do they go? They go to the areas where the president has total, unchecked authority: national security, intelligence, emergency powers. The article briefly touches on national emergency declarations in the final paragraph, almost as an afterthought. It dismisses them as unlikely to withstand scrutiny. Unlikely or planned? If I were designing a psychological operation, I would tell the public that emergency powers are off the table right before I use them. I would tell the public that my hands are tied right before I took the gloves off. This article is setting the stage. It is establishing a baseline of weakness so that any future action looks like a despot anomaly rather than a planned offensive. It's manipulation 101. Let's go deeper. Let's look at the entities this article claims are doing the limiting. They list the Federal Reserve. They list the bond markets. They list international treaty obligations. Since when are these valid limitations on a sovereign nation's leader? The article treats them as forces of nature, like gravity. The president cannot act because the bond market reacted negatively. Excuse me? This is the most suspicious part of the entire text. CNN is subtly reinforcing the idea that the president should be subservient to global financial interests. They aren't just reporting on power limitations, they're enforcing them. They're telling you, the viewer, that it is normal for the stock market to have a veto over the White House. They mention that the trade tariffs proposed in Q3 were scaled back due to pressure from international partners. They frame this as diplomacy. I call it capitulation, or worse, collusion. If the president is being limited by foreign entities, that is not a domestic political analysis story. That is a national security crisis. But CNN glosses over it. They present it as a mundane fact of life. Oh, well, the G7 didn't like it, so we couldn't do it. Why is the media running defense for foreign influence? If you read the section on economic realities, it suggests that inflation fears are the primary leash on the administration. But who controls the narrative on inflation? The institutions that are cited as the limitations. It's a circular logic loop. The institutions create a crisis, or the fear of one. The media reports that the crisis limits the president, and the president recalibrates. Is this a limitation, or is